Hello, Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 17, Program 7. Most of us sew for the fun of it, and what I really enjoy is making everything look not only as good as I can possibly do, but also to look distinctive, to have that something extra. We'll work on more man-made leathers today, but these techniques could just as easily be applied to other fabrics, whatever it is that we want to embellish. Now what I have here is another thing that I saw in a catalog, and I thought, I can do that. Just find a pattern that's close to it and make the differences. Here it is down here, or something similar at least. I changed a few things on it. The pockets are different and so on. But I kind of like the idea down there, so I just made something kind of similar. And what I'm going to talk about is the belts and the belt carriers and a few embellishments then. Well, what I have for a belt carrier on this one is kind of little tortellini. What I have for a belt carrier on another one might be something different, but I'd like to tell you about those. These things all sort of look like pasta to me, any of these carriers. So first of all, let's just go back to the one I was working on last week, that plum-colored one. And I haven't made the belt yet for it, but it's going to have a belt there around the waist. It is also just a jacket to wear over pants that I'll have belted. I'm working on it right now, but notice I had to piece it. It wasn't long enough. As far as how long a belt should be when you don't have a pattern for it, put a tape measure around your waist and tie it up to see exactly how long you want it. And if that tape measure isn't long enough, maybe you want it an extra 6 inches or whatever. But at least this gives you a good estimate, and you can decide how much shorter or longer you want it than the tape measure. And since I wanted this longer than the piece of leather I had, I've pieced it. And notice how I didn't do a straight cut across there. It is cut at an angle so that when this is all sewn together and turned right side out, the bulk of that joining will be distributed. And notice also when I put the interfacing in, I didn't put it over that or it would just emphasize it on the outside. I wanted it to be as invisible as possible, so I put the interfacing under it. I put the interfacing on first, stitched and pressed afterwards. And notice also it has interfacing all the way across. Sometimes I would only put it on half a belt, but this time I want to beef up this belt a little bit and make it heavier. So you have to make all these judgment calls as you're in the process of sewing to decide exactly what's going to be best. Well, I might also, besides just fastening it with belts, do something with zippers on some of them. I'd like you to look at a model who's wearing a zippered one. And this is just a fun jacket. It's a leather motorcycle jacket, man-made leather. And I decided it would be a fun place to put crystal zippers. So to put crystal zippers in, you can do it a couple of ways. Here I've just cut a little slash in this and slashed it to the corner so that I can press the seams back. That's one way. Another way, if it's easier, because you always look for the easiest way, the way you can do best. Another way is to put a piece of lining fabric on and stitch around and then slash through all those layers. And maybe that makes it easier for you to turn it all back accurately instead of just turning back a small seam. And then of course once you have that done, it's just putting it over the zipper and stitching around it. So it really is an easy application. But also, back on the model, notice that it does have a belt and it has the tortellini on it, the same as the one I'm going to put on this, or already have put on this red leather one. So to make this belt, I'll show you in a little bit on the machine, because it's kind of a fun little tie belt with a fringe on the end that I've seen in a couple of commercial things. So you can make whatever you see, you can make it. Here's what the belt loop looks like. And this was made over a fast turn so that I could just turn it right side out. It was just a tube pressed, or not pressed at all, just stitched and then turned right side out, and you cut lengths, whatever they need to be. And this little one, how I have sewn it on, is just to kind of roll it around. I didn't want anything top stitched. I wanted it to just have a soft look. All of the waist treatment is very soft here. And then to stitch it on, I simply did a little stitching from this side of it, machine stitching, but I did a little bit here as I could reach it, and did a little bit over here, so it is secure, and all that joining that doesn't look too wonderful as you look at it, the belt covers it. No one will actually see it. So it's just fine. Now what I very often do with belt carriers is this. I have already pressed this on, and it's peel off paper. It's a fusible, and I'm just going to press this again real quickly to warm it up. I'll do this little short one instead. And this is just for purposes of warming it up, because once you have it warm, then when you peel off the paper, you can, with your fingers, do most of the rest of the job. Okay, I've peeled off the paper, if I can get it off my fingers, and then I'm going to just bring these edges to the center, and when you press it down, it's all warm, it sticks together, and bring these edges to the center and press them down. So this is an easy way of doing it. And then just turn it over again, put a press cloth on and press it, and then I'd take it to the machine and go ahead and stitch it. So all these are stitched, but that's how they were made, because sometimes it's easier to do it this way than to turn the little tubes inside out. So whatever works out right. Now these are the belt carriers, by the way, that obviously I'm going to put on the plum jacket with that wider belt. Another kind of belt carrier might be on this jacket back here, and it's just big patch pockets, and they're long enough at the top, the pockets are, that I folded under the top edge of them, and that's the belt carrier for that jacket. So a lot of different ways you can do these things, and it's fun to invent some things that nobody else is doing. Now what I want to show you over at the machine is how to do this little fringy thing on the end of a belt. So let's just go over there and see what happens. And before I tell you about that belt, before I show you that, we ran out of time last program. And so let me show you what we were working on at that time. I was just telling you for a square pointed collar that you would first grade it, make each seam allowance a different size, and then you would turn it so that it's right side out and roll it slightly to the back side and press it. But what if you have a rounded collar, and I do on that coat that I had on today. That's a shawl collar, it's all rounded there. You can't put that over the point presser and press it open first as you can with the square point. And so what you do if you have a rounded collar like this is go ahead and grade it the same way. You want one shorter seam and one longer seam allowance. So just go ahead and grade it and then turn it right side out. And you can't press it open first, you just turn it. But what I find very helpful as I turn it is to kind of press it with my thumb and fingers like this. I just sort of rub it together, and it does a fairly effective job of pressing it temporarily until I can then just put it down flat on the ironing board, put a press cloth on top and press it. Because without doing that, it tends to want to come out in little peaks like this and doesn't really do a wonderful job. So there are all kinds of techniques. Just try it on scraps first and you'll get the best way that way. What I'm going to do though with this belt, here is an end of a belt, the same as that one. And you can see as I turn this big tube inside out that it does, maybe you can see it, it does have some cable cord inside because I want it padded out inside so that it stays nice and fat. About the size of your little finger is how big it is perhaps. And then as far as this end goes, take a piece of the leather, this one's about 3 inches wide and about 5 inches long. Make that fringe as long as you want, and just go ahead and cut all these little fringy things, either with a rotary cutter, because you can certainly cut it with a straight blade and just stop in the same place on every one of them, or cut it with shears, either one, whichever one you find that you can do the better job with. And once you get it all completely cut, all fringed, then you just put it on the end of that belt, and I think I'll just cut it off right here because I probably have about enough to go around it. Okay, actually I would make it longer for a bigger fringe, but just in the interest of saving time. Then what I did to get that on is put it like this, right sides together on the end of the belt, and just roll it around. And once it's all rolled around here, then under your foot, we can do a little bit of stitching there. And what I want to stitch is just straight stitch across the end. And just do this carefully. Now you're going uphill because there's a lot of stuff here. And if you find that it isn't going to do the job, I like to turn the hand wheel here first to see if it'll work, because sometimes since you're going uphill, it won't want to go across. Now as a whole, these suedes and leathers are so nice and soft that it doesn't present much of a problem. And I didn't even do a great job of stitching this because I didn't start at the edge and I'm not going quite to the edge. I'm going to back stitch. It still is going to work out just fine. And the reason I didn't do a wonderful job is because had I started on the end, the foot would have been going too much of a slant. You want that foot to sit flat as much as possible. And the same for the other end. It'd be slanted the wrong way, and it might tend to skip stitches or give you a few problems if the foot is slanted in a way it shouldn't be. So I really have mainly just done this across the top. And then you just work it around. By the loose edge here first, you start turning it, and just keep turning it as it goes around, and it comes out looking magnificent. And you can see what an easy thing it is to do. But doesn't that end up a pretty little finish? So that's how that belt is. Everything we do is really pretty simple if you just figure out how to get the job done. Okay, well, let's move on. And after I got my red jacket done, I had some extra fabric. And so with that extra fabric, of course, nothing goes to waste in my sewing room. It's all going to be used sooner or later. So what I had is enough to make this vest, and I had enough left over from this blouse to line it in this silk that I used in the vest. But what I was doing on this is top stitching and thinking what I could do that's a little bit different. Now, a couple of things I did that are different. This comes down to a low V, and so down here at the bottom, I thought, well, why don't I just have the buttonholes going in the same direction as the V neckline instead of making a separate line and going across as buttonholes usually do. But doubly, I did that because I was going to have all this elaborate lacing go along, and so I, again, didn't want to distort it by having that go a different direction. So this is why the buttonholes go in the same direction as the lacing. And try for whatever buttonhole seems to be best on your machine. It might be any one of a number of them. Try them all to see what works out best in the leather. Now, any kind of buttonholes can be done in this. Notice that I had the bound buttonholes on that deep plum colored jacket. On this, I'm putting machine buttonholes. You name it. Whatever you want to do, they all work out very well because this is such an easy fabric to work with. I really love to. And so I just put in machine buttons there, or buttonholes. And then as far as the button goes, last series I did some covered buttons, or buttons that you make yourself instead of buying commercial ones. Here was one that I liked, and this was the same leather, and I actually intended to use it on that leather jacket that I just took off, except I ended up making it a wrap coat and not even putting any buttons on, so I didn't use them. But what this was twin needle pin tucking, and you just do that on a big strip of fabric and then cut out the circles and cover a button. So that's what I have here, and it does make a pretty button. I'll use this on something else for a contrast, on some sort of maybe a tweed, a wool or something, and put these leather buttons on it. What I've actually used then on this vest is just commercial buttons, and I decided because they had kind of big holes in the buttons, this would be a good place to make, instead of sewing it on with thread, it seemed to be just a good place to sew it on with little leather strips. So again, just use your little rotary cutter or your shears, either one, and cut strips of this. Now don't cut them too short to begin with, or you're going to have a hard time sewing a knot or tying a knot. What I've done is just do a bar tack on the machine. That's dropping the feed dog and stitching in place here, just bar tacking this leather on. And then work with a button that has big enough holes that you can just thread this right through. I've cut these to a point, the end of the little leather strips, so that it'll go right through that buttonhole, and just pull it through on each side and then tie it. Or you could do the reverse. You could put it through the other way and tie it onto the jacket in some way and just have it showing as a bar across the top. But I kind of like the idea of the little tie there on top, so I'd tie it. And this doesn't come untied easily, so if you tie just a single knot, it'll probably stay and you won't have to do any more. And then go ahead and trim off the ends in little points, or however you want them to be trimmed. And it makes another kind of pretty little detail. Something a little different that you won't see everyone else wearing is what I'm always after. What I also did, though, is some top stitching. Now, anytime you do top stitching on this, you probably want to make bigger stitches. In any of these collars, I have a lot of top stitching going on the collars of any of the leather things I have, or the suede things. And almost always when I do top stitching, I'll just get a little scrap of fabric here and do a little top stitching on it to show you. Almost always I do one line of stitching that is the width of the presser foot away from the edge. So one line I might do like this. I'll tell you what, I'll do it in a piece of red instead because it'll show up better. So let me just get this red scrap over here and fold it under. And the first line I usually do with the edge of the foot because that does a good job. And I'm going to enlarge my stitches way up to about, 3 or even 3/5 maybe, back to 3. Okay, and as you do those stitches then, just keep it, the edge of the fold of the fabric, the edge of the fabric, just keep it right at the edge of the foot so that you can make a nice straight line. Now what you want to resist when you do anything like this is the temptation to watch the needle go up and down, because this is when you make a crooked stitching line. If you just watch whatever your guide is, like the edge of the foot in this case, then you're going to do a much nicer job. What I'm going to watch for the second line, because I want a really nice flat look, so I usually on those tailored type things do 2 rows of stitching. So here I'm going to do this one close to the edge, and here what I'd be watching is just a little place, a little gradation right there in the foot. I'd watch that to make sure that I have an even line. And any place you don't have an even line, for goodness sake, take it out and do it over again because you want it to look really marvelous. Well, if I'm going to do something a little bit decorative, what I've done here is just a really big stitching line like this. Now these were, perhaps about 3.5 or 4 point. These stitches that I made here in this leather are really big stitches. They're quite far apart. And I just wanted to experiment a little bit with little laces cut from the, here I have a whole lot of them cut. Cut them again with rotary cutter or scissors, whatever's easiest. This is already untied. And then I'm going to do a little lacing here. I'll do it with the purple since it shows up better on the red. And what I use for lacing is a tapestry needle, because it is with a nice big eye here, and it has a blunt point, and that eye is so big you can easily thread your leather through it. And if you'll just stay in, now that's another thing. Okay, let me get it through again. And then do a little lacing. Now what I'm going to do for this lacing is I have done these stitches so far apart, they're about the width apart as these little laces are that I'm going to put in them. Therefore, and I was trying different ways as I go back and forth and lace under that stitching. This I was going through 2 rows. I have 2 parallel rows here and going back and forth. And this is how I thought I was going to do my vest. But you know how you keep changing ideas right in the middle of the project. Here I was going about every other stitch back and forth, and I thought, no, I didn't like that look. This looked I kind of liked, so that I'd have a solid piece down the middle and these little peaks there on each side. And then I tried it just a single line of stitching, and I thought I like that one better still. So this is what I actually did on that vest. And that's just starting here and going through, and make sure each time that it's the right side of the leather that shows. The back side of the leather, of course, is just a knit, kind of a tricot look. And then I'm going to go right back the next stitch right next to it, because I'm not going to skip any stitches. I'm going to take every one of them. And when you get up here close, then make sure that you have, just get it up close so it forms a little peak and comes back again. And then go through again the other way. Now this is another good activity when you're on the telephone. When my sister calls, I do things like this because I know she's going to talk for an hour. So I always have some hand projects right next to the telephone so that I can use my time to its best advantage. And so I'll just straighten it each time before you pull it in tightly, and then go back the other way, so it just goes back and forth. And that's kind of a pretty way of doing it. I like that. Another way might be to use something completely different. Here is some ribbon that I've gone through the same way and just done that instead of using leather scraps. Or another way is to go round and round, as this one is that I've started over here. It's also just laced through the tapestry needle, but instead of going back and forth, it is curling around that thread each time. So if I'm coming up, I'm going down like this. So I will go through the same side each time. And this time as it comes through, I'll do a little, there, pull it up tight and turn it over. You can turn it over. These are big stitches, so turn it over before you pull it tight so it looks just perfect every time. So here's another idea that you might find appealing. Another one that you sometimes see in commercial jackets is this one. Now you can see over on this vest, you can see this probably took me a while. It might have been a couple of conversations with my sister before I got this one all laced back and forth, but I kind of like the look. I hadn't seen anything like this ever before, so it's something a little different. But what I have seen before is lacing like this. And what this is a couple of ways of doing the same thing. What you use for this is those snap setters that punch holes, and just put it, I usually do it with that so I can see where it's going down. And it might be a good idea before you start to take a marker and also a little measure so that you get these all evenly spaced. So I would probably take a little a hem gauge or something and put it right next to it so that I get all these holes marked so I know exactly where I want them to be before I start, so they're all ½ inch apart or whatever distance apart you want them. And then it's easy to get this prong right down on top of that little mark you have and punch it. What I've also done with this, and I probably would do this with the edge of a jacket, notice it's leather on both sides, it's 2 layers of it. I have this one fused together with some of that peel-off paper fusible, so that it firms it up a little bit, it makes it a little bit stiffer, and it holds it right together, so it's easy to do this job when you do that. And then as far as lacing this, this one just goes round and round, and each time you take a stitch through, you can either do it just with this, because that hole's big enough that you can do it this way, or if you find it easier, use that tapestry needle, or this one just goes in and out. So it's like a basting stitch here, and this one's also pretty. Maybe to do it in the same color, or maybe as I've done here in a contrasting color, whichever you prefer, but it is kind of a pretty look. Well, remember last week I had a vest on, and I want to show you the model in the vest that I had on last week, because it was all done with a memory card, and I like what those memory cards do on my Memorycraft 9000. Notice the trapunto stitching that goes all around the collar and down the front and around the hip line, around that band. This is all done not by me, for goodness sake. It was all done automatically on this quilting card, this memory card, the 106 card, and it has, I don't know, 45, 50 designs. Just a wonderful array of them. So what I have done is stitch all around that just automatically, just push the button and the machine does it all by itself. And what I have quilted that to is this backing. It's just a fleece, it's a sew-in fleece that I've put on it. And it gave a little bit of extra loft, so it's more leathery that way. But then also what I have done on that is just cut little holes in the back side of it, and with that little hole cut, then you can push in a little fiber fill, a little quilt batting, and push it in with whatever tool seems to be applicable to the job, whatever does it best. Maybe the point of scissors, maybe some tweezers to get it started in there. But anyway, you push that in, and that pads it out nicely and gives that three-dimensional look. So that's what's been done on that. But there are other ways you can use the same memory card. And once you've dialed the design, and I'm just going to do that, I'll go back to the menu here so that I can go to automatic embroidery. And what design I have on here right now is this one, number 5, I see. So I'll just push that. And this is what number 5 would do. That's this design. It's not the same one that was on the vest. And what I can do instead of stuffing it and making that trapunto look is how about some cut work out of the same thing. So what I have put together here instead of the softer backing is 3 different layers of leather. And with those 3 different leathers and with 3 different leaves here, I have cut this one through 1 layer only so the silver shows. I'm going to cut this one, and I've already started it, through 2 layers. And so what we'll see, and I'm just going to cut as closely as I can, as close to the stitching over here as I can. What we'll see here is the blue leather, because I've gone down 2 layers. And what I will do over here is probably the silver layer again, so that you have 3 different things that show. And it just makes a really pretty something different again. Maybe they didn't mean for that memory card to be used this way, but that's the joy of being a sewer. You put yourself into it, and so you don't depend just on the machine to do everything it will do. You can still vary it still more by putting your own individual looks, and I'll just get rid of that. But you can see I'll have several colors there. So that's another fun way to use it. Or here's something else. If you aren't so blessed as to have this machine and to have those memory cards, you can still do some free motion stitching or some do your own designs. What I have done here is just take little maybe labels, maybe computer labels, or maybe the little sticky notes, and I just cut little squares out of this sticky place here, put it down on my leather, and stitched all around this. And if you don't have any artistic ability, goodness, this is certainly an easy way to go. And then cut down to the different colors this way. And you could make some very interesting designs by varying the geometric things that you put down there. Everybody can do this successfully. No talent needed. You don't have to be an artist. Everyone can do beautiful things on the sewing machine. And don't you just love to sew? Well, I'm not going to throw away any of these scraps, as they can, at some time, all find a use as embellishments. Sometimes the remnants of this and that go so well together to become one piece, all color blocked. Next time we'll work on it. Come join me.